Welcome to the Compact Podcast. Today we'll discuss the controversies surrounding Trump's immigration approach and the inspiring space journey led by the journalist and philanthropist, as The Guardian says, Lauren Sanchez, wife of Jeff Bezos. I'm joined by Ashley Frawley and Geoff Shullenberger, and I'm Matthew Schmitz. So there's a lot going on, obviously, with Trump and immigration. Central issue for him in the campaign. He's come into the White House. He promised the largest deportation operation in American history. And the most prominent cases have surrounded attempted deportations of pro-Palestinian protesters on U.S. campuses, including Mahmoud Khalil, a student at Columbia, and the deportation of various aliens to El Salvador, where they've been held in prisons run by Nayib Bukele's government. One of them, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, has been the subject of particular interest. Courts have said he needs to be brought back to the United States. The Trump administration isn't complying. What do you guys make of all this? Just give me some black and white answers here. I want you to come down hard on one side or the other.
Well, I'm not sure that I was going to come down hard, so maybe I've got this whole analysis here that is like, what's happening here? Is it this or is it that?
None
Jeff,
of
tell me
this compact theory guy analysis. We need some takes.
Jeff, come down hard, and then I'll complicate your narrative.
So I'm going to say it's bad, actually. The overall approach is seemingly maximally alienating in a way that tracks a type of politics we've seen evolve over the years, and we could cite examples of it from the Biden administration too. But it seems that a certain kind of appealing to the base is essential here, although even there, when people were saying they were voting for Trump over immigration, I don't think for the most part what they meant was that they were, really upset about people on student visas at elite universities. And so, the prominence of those cases has been kind of remarkable in terms of its lack of relation to the perceived immigration mandate. And then, the other, so it seems to me that the degree to which Trump had a mandate coming in on immigration had to do mainly with the equally extreme, or let's say comparably or equivalently extreme policies of the last administration in terms of allowing an unprecedented influx, which had major effects on community resources and facilities in many places, including in the part of New York City where I live, and also on wages and things like that. And so, I would interpret the mandate as largely economic in nature, but it seems that it's been instead used to pursue this kind of new war on terror, which is basically being waged against student protesters at elite universities. And second of all, to pursue this kind of, again, I would say maximally alienating approach of attempting to turn El Salvador into a sort of new Guantanamo, but not for suspected terrorists in the way they were previously understood, but, aliens with criminal records. And again, I think the way that this is being pursued is not, it doesn't respond to any particularly sane policy necessity. There's no argument that I've seen made particularly strongly that this has to do with some kind of lack of facilities for detention. Now, if they were in fact pursuing the large scale sweeps that they promised last year, maybe that would be the case. Although it's unclear whether the most cost effective way of dealing with that would be to pay El Salvador to lock people up. But the point being, if they were pursuing these large scale sweeps, perhaps there would be a question of we don't have enough facility space to house these people, and so it's here worth noting that it's a bit hard to figure out what the scale of deportation operations is now compared to previously. By some measures, it's smaller than it was under Biden, although that presumably partly has to do with the reduced numbers of people crossing the border. Thus, if a large number of deportations under Biden were people who had basically recently crossed over, who were then immediately sent back, if there are fewer people crossing the border, that means the kind of low-hanging fruit of deportation is less forthcoming. So, point is, there doesn't seem to be a kind of sweeping deportation operation of the sort that was promised. In fact, a couple of days ago, Trump basically said, well, we don't want to give too much of a hard time to the farmers and the hotels and places like that are dependent on this labor, which was a pretty astonishing statement, I would argue, because it, in some sense, gave up the game that, and, we've published things to this effect in Compact, that, the GOP has a lot of constituents who are business owners who rely on cheap illegal immigrant labor, and therefore, certainly mandating E-Verify, which is something that Trump avoided doing in his first term, is avoiding doing in the second term, and in fact directly contravened by saying, well, we don't want to make things too hard for the farmers who rely on people to pick their strawberries or whatever. So it seems that there is a kind of diversion going on here where instead of doing stuff that would respond to this basic kind of economic mandate, as I described it, they are engaged in this kind of high profile attempt to I suppose expand the window of what is regarded as acceptable in the realm of immigration enforcement. But again, the framing for this is largely this kind of war on terror one, where suspected members of gangs are defined as terrorists and therefore can be deported using laws specifically applying to terrorists. And therefore, you can do things like send them to Salvadoran prison without due process. And so, yeah, I find all of this as somebody who was sort of shaped by opposition to the war on terror and is still deeply informed by that. I find all of this pretty disturbing, and again, a kind of diversion from what I would take to be the actual thing people wanted when they said they were voting for Trump on the basis of immigration, which was, again, mostly having to do with just reducing the large numbers that had entered the country. There was always this element of Trump's campaigns going back to 2016 where he would highlight these families of people whose relatives had been killed by illegal immigrants. I always found this a kind of grotesque spectacle, and a sort of mawkish and extremely exploitative way of going about politics. But it's not surprising that you sort of go for the tearjerker stories. But they seem to have mobilized this into a politics that is focused on finding these people you can, on this basis, sort of identify as quote unquote terrorists and treat much in the manner that we did in the era when the Bush administration was pursuing extraordinary rendition and such policies. So really testing the limits of, due process and legal protections. Many people defending this have taken the position that people who are in the country illegally have no due process rights. This is, in my view, an absurd and dangerous position to adopt, because if you don't have due process rights, it doesn't matter whether you're illegally in the country, because if you don't have due process rights, you can't prove whether you're legally or illegally in the country. The further thing I would say is, it's also interesting that they're actually going after. I mean, I saw some like white nationalist account the other day posting like that they had locked up some Harvard postdoc of Russian nationality, and he was sort of saying like, the point of this was to get rid of to get rid of the sub races of the the low IQ sub races, and not to target elite human capital pursuing important like genetic research or something like this. And so what's kind of amazing is that the way that they're pursuing this immigration policy is even alienating white nationalists, which is kind of remarkable. But I have noticed, and I mean, I have European friends who are long-term permanent residents who are actually worried to go abroad because they've seen stories of random French, German, etc. Green card holders or tourists who have been detained by ICE in recent weeks, and so they're afraid if they go abroad they won't be able to return. And this seems not like based based on what I've been seeing, these cases are probably relatively few overall, but it's not an entirely unfounded fear. So this all just seems like a very weird politics. I'm not sure who it's making happy other than Stephen Miller. But it all seems puzzling again in relation to what I would take to be the actual nature of the popular mandate on this issue.
So I want to just kind of go back and look at some of the numbers under the Biden administration and then the initial numbers we have for the Trump administration in terms of the number of people entering the country. During the kind of migrant surge under Biden's administration, we had an estimated 250,000 illegal aliens entering the country per month, including 500 individuals on the terror watch list that were encountered by the Border Patrol in 2023, 10,000 roughly Chinese nationals in 2023, and to your point, Geoff, 57,000 inadmissible Russian nationals, much higher from Russia than from China. In the early, we have 2 complete months of the Trump administration so far. The number of people encountered has been much lower. In February, it was 8,500 illegal aliens. It's continuing and extending some of the gains that we saw later in Biden's term, where the Biden administration seemed to take a harder stance on immigration. And then if we look at deportations, Trump again has promised the largest deportation operation in American history. To do that, he's going to have to beat Barack Obama. Barack Obama is the undisputed heavyweight champion of deporting illegal aliens. He removed 400,000 from the country during his presidency. Trump, in his first 2 months in office, has eliminated 11,000 in February and a bit over 12,000 in March. If he continues at something like that pace, he should end up removing more than 500,000 over his one term, which will represent a much faster clip than we saw during Obama's 2 terms with the 400,000. So Trump is on track to have the largest deportation operation in American history. But he also, and importantly, is not on track to get anywhere near his own kind of self-declared target of removing 1 million immigrants over the next 4 years. Right now, he's looking to fall well short of that. the easiest way for him to get there is to remove the more than 1 million people who are currently slated for deportation, but who, for legal reasons, can't be sent back to their original countries. So this is a big part of what the Trump administration is trying to do right now. They're trying to negotiate other places to send all of these illegal aliens, or all these people slated for deportation. And I would tend to think that very few of these people will be removed to anything like Bukele's hellish prison system. But I don't think that's a criticism. I think he celebrates its kind of grimness and kind of theatrical cruelty. I think that's that's a big part of his kind of advertisement for his system. But I think it's fair to say that the arrangements Trump's reaching with Bukele, he's hoping to have maybe softer versions of that with many other countries. Jeff, I think your comments on the way Trump is really testing the outer limits of the law, um, asserting kind of every constitutional prerogative he can possibly invoke, however unconvincingly or speciously. I think that's absolutely true, and you've seen conservative commentators, including some very hardline anti-immigration people, note that, and it doesn't seem likely to help construct a consensus around his immigration regime. One thing I've been kind of following while watching this American story is what's going on in Poland. Poland is, currently has its kind of Western aligned, kind of liberal leaning Prime Minister Donald Tusk. He's a favorite of the transatlantic chattering class, closely associated with all of the great and good people. And he has recently brought into effect a law that suspends asylum in Poland. This is a really significant break from what's now a very long-standing element of of immigration law in the West. Really, with the uh, end of World War II, seeing what happened to European Jewry, and then looking at what was being faced by Jews and others in the Soviet Union, a very strong consensus formed around the idea that there was a right to asylum. And Poland is really the first Western country to break from that, which is quite historic. It's a 6 month suspension. It can be renewed, and it's occurring in a particular geopolitical context. Poland shares a border with Belarus, shares a border with Russia. There have been claims, I think, persuasive and well-grounded ones, that Belarus in particular, and Russia to some extent, are using migration as a weapon of foreign policy, basically bringing people from other countries, from the Middle East, elsewhere, kind of to the Polish border, and trying to facilitate their crossing, just to test and stress the political systems of these neighbors with whom they have very bad relations. And so Tusk and he has the support of his right wing enemies, the Law and Justice Party. They're trying to resist that pressure. So, what I see in Poland, and in a less sharp way in the U.S., is a kind of breakdown in a long-standing system. I think in the U.S. it's happening in a less regular and defensible way. I mean, in Poland, they've passed a law. They've it's all proceeding through regular legal means, whatever one makes of the actual outcome. And they've built a national consensus around it. Here in the U.S., I think there's also an attempt to rewrite the accepted rules, but that same kind of consensus isn't being built. And I think the Trump administration, they claim this is an invasion. They really claim the same warrant that Tusk's government in Poland is claiming, but they haven't got the support of the opposition party for their extraordinary measures, and they aren't going to.
It's funny that you mentioned, Geoff, the low-hanging fruit of deporting students, and Matthew, the numbers, the targets. And that's been a very common kind of way of reaching some sort of arbitrary target that lots of countries have used. So, we need to get these immigration numbers down. Well, let's, reduce the numbers of students coming in, which literally nobody is talking about when they talk about the problem with immigration. They're, as you said, they're not talking about, some chemical PhD student or whatever. But it allows also for the deflection of attention from things like the low paid labor that people like Trump enjoy employing and that keep wages down and so on. And that's the thing that really makes people angry. But it does allow one to say, oh, look, I've brought the numbers down. So it's quite a stupid, dirty trick that they pull with students. But here it's sort of combining it with political discontent. It kind of gives that cheap political point scoring a little bit more cachet. So not only are we doing something about immigration, we're doing something about these darn uppity liberals on these campuses here. So, it gives you a certain amount of it feels good. It feels pleasing. We're doing something here. But of course, it's not actually getting anywhere near the heart of what actually makes people angry about immigration. And what makes people angry about immigration is obviously what I just said, things like bringing down wages, but also a sense that the whole system doesn't really work. And that in spite of an incredible proliferation of rules and promises, it just appears to be more and more of a shambles. So I've been trying to think about why that is. It seems to be the main problem with the Trump administration is trying to both live within and support a framework that is causing the problems that they are pointing out and that they were elected to solve, but also to overcome those problems, which is an impossible task. So, a few weeks ago, it was a quite obvious point to make, but was it a few weeks ago, a week or so ago, that line of saying, was it Trump that said, very little should be actually done by government. We should do more by businesses. And it was like, oh, wow, what a fresh take that is. That's literally what states have been doing for ages and actually what got us into this mess. This idea that the state should just be there to kind of write some rules, oversee things, but actually, they will steer. They'll steer the ship, and businesses, they will row. So that's the famous sort of steering, not rowing thesis from the whole regulatory capitalism thesis. So that's what they're like, hey, I just thought of this right now. What if states just steer and the businesses row? How amazing. But what actually happens with regulatory capitalism and the regulatory state is that you have this proliferation, this ever expanding regulatory apparatus that enforces rules and standards, provides oversight and so on, rather than actually doing anything. But when it comes to actually doing anything, you have businesses, they go in and out of business. They pop up, they disappear. NGOs are staffed by a revolving door of people who come in and out of government, go in and out of business. So when it comes to actually getting something done, all of the levers that the state says will be pulled can't be pulled. There's nothing to do there. So the state becomes more and more, ironically, ineffective. Well, not ironically, that's kind of the point, but the state becomes more and more ineffective at actually doing anything. And you can see this with immigration. And it's a feature and a bug, because the endless sort of proliferation of complex rules and so on functions to kind of keep people at arm's length, keep people within a system of purview, keep migrants within this, under the watchful eye of government, but not actually without actually doing anything about it, partially because of lack of facilities to actually hold people. But all of the enormous complexes of rules and courts and so on functions as a way of sort of keeping people within a system without actually having to keep them within a system, within a sort of a facility or something. Doing something directly becomes its own kind of form of control. But it does, and the effect of this as well is to kind of diffuse risk. So if the state directly deports people or keeps people in facilities, the blame is clear. You look what you have done. You're keeping people in all of these facilities. So it's much better to kind of outsource this. Put it on other countries. You guys will do this. You've got detention centers. You do this. Or to outsource to, I don't know, NGOs or whoever, all of this huge apparatus of controlling all of these people. But it's quite easy of sort of plausible deniability. I didn't do this. I'm not the one exerting power here. Power is diffused across all of these by delegating to all these different actors. But it does this at the cost of an ever-proliferating ever-proliferating regulations and rules and so on that lose any kind of logical end. Nothing's actually happening here. And people see this and they go, you keep talking about controlling immigration. You keep promising to control immigration, and then you don't actually do it. Nothing is actually happening here. And then, of course, the other thing is that states like to talk endlessly about immigration because it allows them to scapegoat all kinds of different failures, which is kind of the obvious point to make. But they don't actually want to control immigration. They will make all kinds of promises. And in this, I'm kind of talking about the UK case here more than the United States, but I assume it's the same thing, where they will say, oh, we're going to bring immigration down to such and such. And they always, always fail. And they fail because they want to. They don't want to actually control immigration. They can't. They can't, and they don't want to. First of all, they can't because much as we may not like it for various reasons, including, the tendency to bring down wages, people are going to come. People will come. They will seek higher wages. If you listen to people's stories about why they migrate, you would agree with them. You wouldn't stay in those situations yourself. And so the more,
but Ashley, wouldn't you say Australia had under its former Prime Minister Tony Abbott, they had this kind of boat people thing, and he basically said, no matter who comes, we're going to send you back, and the arrivals really went down. So that's of a nation that inhabits an entire landmass separate from any other, kind of like the UK, successfully repelling people. We saw the influx drop late in Biden's presidency and now stay low during Trump. So can't there be, if you just turn people back, can't you change it?
Yeah, they'll go somewhere else. You're just gonna push them onto some other. I'm not saying this is a good thing. I'm simply describing what actually happens. If people perceive you to be a soft target, they're going to go to you, right? If you're a harsher target, fewer people will come, but they will still come. They'll just come through deadlier routes. That's just what happens. Now, fewer people might come through those deadlier routes. Fewer people might come to your nation if it's perceived not to be an easy target. But they'll go somewhere else. That's just, I'm afraid, that is simply the way that things work. And I'm not saying this is a good thing or a bad thing, but that is just how it works. But yeah, they're sort of doomed to fail for that reason. But they're also doomed to fail because immigration is how governments have been pursuing economic growth, in addition to things like destroying the family. In other words, getting women to work several crappy jobs, because immigrants and women will tend to take up these jobs that nobody wants in the service industry because they're desperate. Women are desperate. They got kids to feed and they'll do it. And they tend to be easily exploited because they're desperate, as I said. Women are desperate because they need to feed their families, and immigrants are desperate because they're afraid if they get caught, they will be deported. So they're not going to start getting uppity about their rights and so on. So because, it's become less and less profitable to, invest in actual infrastructure, invest in factories, invest in doing things, making things. Well, you try to encourage people into these crap jobs in the service sector, and if they won't do it, you push harder and harder. So they don't actually want to curb immigration. And that's kind of the stalemate that we're in right now. And so we get this incredible state of control and regulation and apparent desperation to control immigration, combined with a sneaking desire not to actually control it at the end of the day. And so you just get proliferation of rules, people stuck in the system forever, they become quite easily exploited, and everybody gets really mad about this because it's not actually doing anything. It's not effective.
I think the student visa issue is so fascinating because that's probably the type of visa that is uh, most likely to be regarded by a broad swath of Americans as good. Yes, we want people to come study here. That makes sense. They're not competing with us in the labor force. So let's have student visas. Um, but I think what we're beginning to see is a convergence between the right's uh, opposition to immigration and its uh, deep hostility to the modern university converging on the issue of student visas. And I mean, there are policy debates worth having. We published a superb essay by Norman Matloff, the emeritus computer science professor at the University of California. I don't remember which branch, but one of the UCs. And he discusses there how student visas are integrated with our immigration system to depress certain American wages in certain sectors. So I think looking at student visas more in those policy terms, like Matt Loft did in that article for us, would be helpful, and maybe provide some more promising avenues for policy reform than maybe some of what we're seeing now. Some really wonderful things happening in the country, uh, and frankly, outside this world, literally out of this world. Blue Origin, the space company run by Amazon's Jeff Bezos, uh, competitor with SpaceX, Elon Musk's company, did something frankly historic. An all-female crew, 6 women went into space. The explorers included Amanda Nguyen, a civil rights activist, the first Vietnamese woman in space, the CBS Mornings co-host Gayle King, pop star Katy Perry, the film producer Carrie Ann Flynn, the former NASA rocket scientist Aisha Bowe, and of course, Lauren Sanchez, wife of Jeff Bezos, journalist, philanthropist, and leader of the Merry Band. Ashley, what was it like to watch this?
So I was trying to get some writing done, but I always have the news on in the background. And I hear the most vacuous, horrific junk coming out of Katy Perry's mouth. And I'm thinking, when I look up at the TV and there's like live rolling coverage of this on Sky News, and it's all about, oh God, women going to space, women taking up space. You see what she did there? So smart.
Very good.
And it was like, this is about emotions, right? Because it's not about emotions. Men go to space, but when women do, it's about our emotions. It's about getting in touch with the earth. Oh my! It was the most. I mean, it was the space launch that truly launched 1,000 memes. It was there just to be memeified. I couldn't believe anyone was actually the reporters are like trying to get something out of these people, and they're like, I just have no words. All right, well, let's put in some effort then. We saw the moon. Well done. That must have really been something. But let me tell you. So everybody's been slagging this off, right? It was ridiculous. It was embarrassing. Somebody on X posted a screenshot of his phone notifications, and it was like 11 minutes ago, Katy Perry launched into space. Like 8 minutes ago, Katy Perry singing in space. 4 minutes ago, Katy Perry returns to Earth, something like that. And it was so funny. It was so quick. And apparently it cost nearly $500 million dollars. So everybody's making fun of this. All these celebrities are just having this free for all. But I think they're making fun of it for all the wrong reasons. People are saying the same old thing. What are you doing going to space when there are all these problems here on Earth? No, I think it's great. It's fantastic that humanity is able to launch the stupidest people possible into orbit. That's amazing. Fantastic. It's even fantastic that they had to come back. I think it's a great thing for humanity to do that sort of thing. It was the commentary around it that was so embarrassing. And you know what, though? I think it's actually in a way, it's quite progressive that it was embarrassing, because it was dripping with all this girl boss nonsense, and everybody's reaction was to vomit. And I think that's great, because for such a long time, putting like boss language in a woman's mouth was a way of making it softer. Instead of having paternalism, which was obviously authoritarian, you had maternalism, and people didn't quite know what to do with it. So I'm trying to like improve my French lately. So I've been my unused French from like 20 years ago. So I've been watching all these films, and I watched Amélie, and it's so interesting how she's like this. Oh, she's such an interesting example of this sort of like androgynous, every kind of woman, every person figure, who enacts this maternalism. She goes around trying to solve people's problems. And at one point she walks like a blind man across the street, and she just leaves him like randomly somewhere. Like, doesn't matter, who cares? But it's struck me as that kind of liberal maternalism in its infancy back in like 2000, whatever it was, 2003, I think that movie came out. I can't remember. Early 2000s kind of liberal maternalism of like, put all this stuff into a woman's mouth and you can soften it. You can make it so you can have a boss who's a woman. Now she can be authoritarian as she wants to be. But if she kind of wraps it up in the language of wellness and emotion and so on, it disarms people. Well, this was ripe for skewering. It's all the same kind of junk, but it just seemed so embarrassing. But here's the thing: I do wonder if it was the first all trans woman launch into space, would the celebrities have skewered it so? Even if it was dripping with all the same performative femininity, they would not, because I think that liberal maternalism is transitioning. Pun intended. I think we are seeing a transition in terms of the powers that be trying to soften their authoritarian messages, put it in the mouth of a man dressed as a woman. People don't really know what to say about it, what to do about it. And even with the height of cancel culture, a dim memory for, I think, I still think that would be quite disarming. That would be quite disarming. So I think that space launch was actually quite interesting because of how roundly ridiculed it was, and it seems to me to signify perhaps the end of a girl boss, but the sort of ideal subject of capitalism being this sort of like girlish emotional figure, and it being now something else, transitioning to something else.
I think that's a fascinating point. You might connect it with Mark Zuckerberg saying shortly after Trump's election that we needed more masculine energy and aggression in the workplace. So maybe things are changing in some way. I need to apologize for our listeners. I think I stated or implied earlier that this was the first all-female space flight. We're getting a note from our fact-checking department saying that the first all-female space flight actually occurred in 1963. Valentina Tereshkova, the Russian cosmonaut, when she was 23 years old, went up into space. So we have to give her due. I gotta say, I really don't hate this. I don't hate anything about this. It strikes me as just kind of embroidering an often dreary world with a kind of faintly ridiculous, but fundamentally charming incident. Yeah, it's a bit silly. Rich people and their and those connected to them tend to do very silly things. Jeff Bezos, leaving the wife of his youth, is probably the person who really should be fingered for any ridiculousness in this situation. But yeah, I mean, this is kind of what rich people do. We have Bezos and Musk seeing who can launch rockets into space most successfully. Um, that's kind of what billionaires should be doing. I guess the question I always want to ask is are they doing as much as they ought to be? We have these billionaire philanthropists. Sanchez is always described as a philanthropist, but are they building libraries that will stand for decades? Like Carnegie did, or if we have Robert Barons, are they going to be building establishments like the Frick Museum in New York? And is there avarice? Is there cruelty and ambition actually being harnessed to advance any kind of civilizational project? That's what I'd like to see, because if it is, then I can, if not approve of, then at least see a kind of benefit in kind of Felix culpa, a kind of benefit in some of these faults of theirs. And will anything come of this space stuff? I guess I'm a bit of a skeptic. I don't really dream of life on Mars, but maybe I'm just too pessimistic. I think if you do think that there's real potential in space exploration, though, we should kind of give these people plenty of room to be silly and to compete with each other in these kind of phallic competitions.
So send Dylan Mulvaney into space is my takeaway from Ashley's analysis.
Just to test the response.
No,
Everyone being like,
it should be Dylan. It should be Dylan Mulvaney with Matt Walsh. Do you remember the beer summit from the early Obama administration? Yeah. We need a kind of space summit between combatants in the U.S. culture war, and I think that would be great. They could stream it on YouTube. It would be incredible for the on their respective channels. It would be great content. That's what I want.
The first culture war in space.
I love it. No, I mean, this is how we transcend the culture war, literally. But I mean, the transitioning point is also interesting in relation to something I often think about with space, which is that I'm always fascinated by, if you go back to the science fiction of the mid-20th century, it's really obsessed with the fact that, and there was recently, I think in the New Yorker, a long piece about the effects of the effects on the body of space travel and time spent in space. And it looked at the brother of Senator Mark Kelly. I can't remember, John Kelly or James, whatever, who, has, I think at this point,
Bill Kelly, Jim Kelly,
whatever, the living man who has logged the most hours in space at this point, and the studies that have been done of the bodily transformations that he's had to undertake. But the point is, the sort of original transhumanist ideals really come out of thinking about the transformation of the body in order to survive interstellar travel, but also that are brought about through the transportation of the body through vast distances in space. So, I think there is something kind of resonant here on that level too, that, I mean, one way to think about the sort of cultural centrality of it is that it embodies, perhaps this desire for transformation and transcendence, but in a way that has sort of become unhappy. And so perhaps the way to transcend not just the culture war, but our own kind of broader cultural pathologies is to pursue this space, adventurism to the max, which I've always been in favor of. And so, I celebrate this. I hope that more billionaires will start their own space companies. And, I think this is we can say, oh, well, would be better if it was NASA as part of some national project, which I sort of believe. But on the other hand, it is reminiscent of colonialism, which really does begin with these kind of private enterprises on the part of adventurers who get investments to go and strike out. And so, and then, eventually the state sort of absorbs these efforts. But the point is, I think you can see, what could be the beginnings of a set of developments that will allow us to move beyond the sort of unhappy consciousness of the culture war and into some new realms. And my final thought here, just going back to that, is like, one point I've become obsessed with is that, for a long time, science fiction was obsessed with just how difficult in purely physical terms it was to undertake these voyages across space. And, then something happened with the end of the serious sort of, the Apollo project and the serious space program in the 70s, then coincides with these movies like Star Wars, which of course I was immersed in as a child, where journeying across space is just the same as sort of journeying across town, hopping in your car to go to the supermarket or whatever. And so that there's kind of a loss of the sense of space as this realm of potentiality, of new potentiality. And so, hopefully something like that will be recaptured through these efforts, even if they are at this point a little bit cringe. So
Geoff, you said that the European powers eventually absorbed what were originally these private enterprises, opening up new territories. So if I hear you correctly, you are calling for the nationalization of SpaceX. Is that correct?
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know.
Well,
I mean,
all right. So
I
instead
think,
of privatizing,
eventually.
Okay, so Musk will, in the short term, Musk will privatize the government, and in the long term, the government will nationalize SpaceX. Okay, and so the dance will continue to play out. Thanks, Geoff. Thank you, Ashley. Coming to you in 2050 will be the first compact space flight, far exceeding the cruises offered by many publications. So put it on your calendars now. 2050 compact space flight featuring Geoff and Ashley, and also our producer Stephen Adebato. Until next time.